Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and before we get started on tonight's story, I'm going to let you know about my small cyborg son. If you head over to makeship.com right now or use the link in the description down below, you can be able to get your hands on my tiny glow-in-the-dark cyborg son. He's only available for the next 3 days, so if you wanted to order him, you got to do so now. We're getting real close to the end of the campaign. We haven't hit goal. I'm hoping we can. I can only do it with your help. If you guys want to get yourselves a little Christmas gift this year, or get one for somebody you know that would love it, he's great for cuddling in the middle of the night, listening to nonstop horror radio, or listening to creepypastas on the channel, or the podcast, or whatever you could want to listen to with a small, cuddly stuffed animal of Mr. Creepypasta. Check him out. He's in the link in the description down below. And now, on to tonight's story. Mary was 6 when she first noticed the rats in the house. It all started, like most childish things do, with fear. Laying in bed at night, she heard them in the walls and thought they were monsters. She would shrink underneath the covers and shudder at the scratching sounds that came from the walls and ceiling of the old country house they lived in, and many a night she would feel like she must surely shudder to death under her comforter. Mary would finally fall asleep with the sounds of scratching in her ears. But even then, she wasn't safe. She would have the worst dreams imaginable, dreams of monsters in the walls with long claws on scabrous hands. They drug their nails behind the walls. They were only looking for the weak spot so they could come through and get her. And every morning when she woke up, Mary would say a little prayer and thank God for keeping her safe for another night. She would suffer like this for a whole month before finally meeting her monsters face to face. And she slept better the next night. Her dad had heard them too, it seemed. Mary found him in the laundry room one morning as she went to get a shirt for school, putting a glob of peanut butter inside of a round plate. She sat and watched him for a moment, trying to figure out what he was doing. And when he looked back and found her lurking, he jumped a little in surprise. "Morning, Squirt. Scared me half to death." "Morning, Dad. What are you doing?" He ruffled her hair as he walked her out of the laundry room. "I'll show you when you get home from school. You should have noticed it by then." Mary went off to school full of curiosity and wonder, and when she came home that afternoon, she went straight to the laundry room to check. The box was still there, and Mary heard something thrashing around inside. She was scared as she approached, certain that the monster from her nightmares would be inside and waiting for her to get close. As she peeked through one of the round holes in the box, Mary saw that it was nothing but a pair of fat, brown rats. They became even more frantic when they saw her peeking. They started running and squealing around the little box, and as Mary watched them, she realized they were just as scared as she had been. Mary didn't even think about what she was doing as she opened the side of the box and let them scamper out. They didn't leave right away. They seemed to try to figure out whether Mary was tricking them or not. Eventually, their survival tendencies took over, and they left the box and ran behind the washing machine. Mary closed up the box so no other rats would scamper in and went to the living room to watch cartoons. She was 2 hours into her afternoon cartoons when her dad came home and went straight to the trap. She heard him in there grumbling confusedly as he looked at the sprung trap with no mice inside. In the end, her dad figured he'd been outsmarted, and he reset the box with more bait. Freeing his prisoners became an afternoon habit of Mary's. She would come home, make a snack, and go see if any mice were in the trap. There usually were. Some of them even looked like the same mice that she let go the day before. Every day she would turn them loose and watch them scamper off before closing the box back up and going to watch cartoons. She had stopped being afraid of the scampering she heard in the night after learning that it was the mice she had been freeing. They were running and playing as though to thank her for helping them, and Mary went to sleep dreaming of happy mice playing hide-and-seek in the walls of the house. The week before Christmas, though, Dad caught the magic mouse. That was also the day he caught her. She was out of school until after New Year, and had gone from half a day of cartoons to a full day of cartoons. Both her brothers were out of the house, and Dad was out back chopping wood when Mary heard a low clang from the laundry room, and an ear-splitting squeal that cut through the sound of Huckleberry Hound like a knife through flesh. She jumped up from the couch and ran to the laundry room, wanting to see the big rat that Dad's trap had caught. In that, she was not disappointed. The rat was huge, big as a kitten, and covered with long white fur that made its red eyes look fierce as they bulged from its head. Mary was hesitant to let this one go, given the size and fierce demeanor. He looked like he might be mean. But as she watched him through the holes of the trap, he did the last thing Mary would have expected him to do. He talked. "Excuse me, child. Do you think you could let me go?" Mary started. Rats weren't supposed to talk. Not to people, at least. She couldn't do anything but stare at him as he stood on his back paws and used his front ones to rub at his nose and whiskers. When he didn't immediately ask again, Mary assumed she had imagined it, letting her imagination run wild again. She started to stand up and ready to return to her cartoons when the rat spoke again. "Please, child. I'll do anything if you just let me go." He had talked. Mary bent down and peered in at him again. He was still sitting there, front paws cleaning his face and the furtive little scampers, but his eyes were locked on Mary. She knew she hadn't imagined it this time. Her hand inched toward the cage lock, but stopped as they came in contact with a mechanism that would open the side. Mary looked at the rat distrustful, and as it stared back at her, she asked her burning question. "You won't bite me, will you?" It laughed, and its laughter was high and strange. "No, no, my dear, I wouldn't dream of it. If you release me, I'll owe you a favor." That was all the reassurance that Mary needed. She opened the side of the trap, and the rat scuttled off in his clicky little paws. He stopped to look back at her as he twitched his nose, seeming to smile as the two stared at each other. He was a very old rat, and his fur was long and white like an old man's beard. He was missing a finger on his left front paw, and his tail looked as though something had chewed the end of it off. He rubbed his paws over his snout again in a strange way of his, and Mary thought that he would surely speak again. In her wonder, Mary hadn't heard her father coming inside. "So you're the one who's been screwing up my trap," he said, and when she turned to look at him, Mary could tell she had made a mistake. He loomed in the doorway, snow sliding off his thick jacket to a puddle on the floor, and as the mouse ran for the hills, her father clamped a hand around Mary's arm and dragged her into the living room. When he was done, Mary didn't think she would be able to sit down for a week. And when he told her mother, she found herself grounded from TV for the rest of winter break. Mary sulked as she sat in bed that night, her backside hurting almost as much as her ego. Her brother had been no help when they'd come home. They'd only said that she shouldn't have been so stupid as to let her dad's rat out of the cage. "They're not supposed to be inside, you dummy. Dad's trying to get rid of them." This information hadn't helped, since Mary didn't want her dad to get rid of them. As they scampered through her ceiling that night, she thought about that sound, disappearing forever, and felt a fresh wave of tears. "Why are you crying, child?" Mary stifled a scream as she turned to see the old rat standing on her nightstand. His white fur stood out like a searchlight in the dark room, and Mary couldn't believe she hadn't seen him before then. He was up on his hind legs, staring at her over his front paws, and he looked like a servant waiting for instruction. Dad's trying to get rid of you and your friends. I don't want you to leave." "Nor do we, child. It's cold outside. Without shelter, my kind will die. I wish they'd just leave you guys alone. I wish they'd just go back and not bother you guys anymore." They were childish words that Mary would come to regret. "My children and I owe you a great debt, young lady. Let me think on this, see if I might have an answer for your wish." You could make my family disappear?" she asked, not daring to believe it. It would be just like the movie she'd watched with Mom and Dad a couple of nights ago, where the boy's family disappeared and he fought the burglars. But this time, though, it would be for real, and not because they accidentally left without her. Mary could do whatever she wanted once they were gone, and no one would be able to stop her. It would be a Christmas dream come true, and Mary stared at the old rat with anticipation. The old rat seemed to contemplate before saying, "We shall see. Give me a few days to think it over. I will speak to you again." Mary fell asleep to the sound of his heavy paws leaving up the hallway. The next few days were full of excitement. Dad didn't catch anything in his traps. He put a lock on it to keep people out, and seemed very upset about this. He'd started hearing them in the walls, making him very angry that he couldn't catch them. Mom seemed to be trying to keep his mind off of it, taking them out to see lights or to Christmas events in town, or just off spending time together as a family. All the while, Mary thought about her secret, and her secret friend in the walls. In her mind, she would never miss her family once they were gone. She would never want them back, and if she did, her new rat friend could bring them back and make it all better again. Children can sometimes fail to realize the harsh realities of loss. She woke 2 days before Christmas to find the rat on her nightstand again. "Excellent news, my child. We have found a way to make your family go away." She started awake when his squeaky little voice cut through the night. She had been nearly asleep and rolled over to look at him when she heard his squeaky voice. His red eyes were fixed on her with an odd intensity, and in his hand was a little bag made of plastic, wound shut with a bread tie. He held it out to her with some reverence. And when she took it, Mary saw it was full of powder. "Your mother had laid out the start of breakfast in the morning. What you must do is sneak downstairs and put this magic powder in the box you use to make the cakes. Then, when they eat the powder, they will go away, and you'll have your wish." Mary looked at the little bag. It was no bigger than a Barbie purse, and the powder inside made a dry, scrunchy sound when she pressed it. The magic rat must have made the spell powder, she guessed. So Mary adding it must be part of the spell. She got out of bed and tiptoed down the hall. The old rat scampered behind her. She took the stairs very slowly so they wouldn't creak, skipping the third step as she landed on the landing softly. The downstairs was very dark. The living room furniture looked squashy and spooky in the dim light. Mary glanced around nervously as she tiptoed, expecting Dad to lunge out and grab her at any minute. As her bare feet touched the linoleum, Mary knew she was home free. The box of pancake mix was just where the rat had said it would be. Her mother had left it out along with biscuit mix, her mixing bowl, and a whisk. Mary opened the box of pancake mix and poured in the magic powder like the old rat had told her. When the bag was empty, she closed it back and turned to see the rat perched on the table as though he'd been observing her distribute the powder. "Now be certain that you don't eat anything at breakfast tomorrow. Otherwise, you'll disappear too," he warned. Mary made a mental note to sleep in tomorrow, so she wouldn't be tempted by any of the yummy smells, and slipped back into bed with a smile on her face that night. Mary knew that tomorrow her Christmas wish would come true. The smell of pancakes and bacon awoke Mary early the next morning. Her stomach growled as she smelled them cooking, but Mary rolled up in her blankets and tried to ignore it. She could hear her brothers getting up, running downstairs, jockeying to be the first to taste the bacon. She heard the smack and the ow as her mom smacked someone on the hand with a spatula and told them to go set the table. Mary smelled eggs, too, as her mother cracked them into the pan. And now her dad was lumbering out of bed and moving towards the stairs. Her mother told him to help set the table, and he called her name up the stairs before going to help her brothers. A few minutes later, her dad knocked on the door and told Mary breakfast was ready. When she didn't stir, he did it again. When she didn't move, he just walked downstairs to join the rest at the table. "Oh well," she heard him grumble. "More for me." Mary hunkered under the covers, the moment she was waiting for approaching. They said grace, a low murmur as they all bowed their heads, and then the sounds of clinking forks and rattling plates began. Mary heard her brothers talking about going sledding today, Dad talking about finally finishing that surprise for someone in the barn, and Mom talking about some last-minute wrapping she needed to do. Her mother was just saying that she'd have to kick us all out of the house so she could finish when she suddenly coughed in a wet, frightening way. Her dad asked if she was okay, but when she tried to say that she was fine, then one of the other brothers started moaning, and Mary heard someone being sick all over the table. She was silent in her blanket cocoon, all excitement lost. Was this what disappearing was supposed to sound like? She heard someone else being sick and a chair crashing over as they fell. She thought it might be her dad, and when someone started screaming, she shuddered deeper into her blanket cocoon. There was the sound of breaking plates, someone falling to the floor and sobbing as someone was sick again and again. Her mother suggested that someone call an ambulance, but it was hard to make out as she vomited loudly. Mary heard Dad bellowing and thumping around, trying to get up from the table before he fell hard to the floor and shook the whole house. Mary pulled her knees to her chest and waited for the sounds to be over, but they went on for much too long. The sounds of vomiting, crying, falling, breaking things, and the watery screams of her family took a long time to be replaced by silence. And in many ways, that silence was worse. The sounds didn't stop suddenly either. They tapered off little by little, and when the last of the crying had dragged to a stop, Mary almost couldn't bring herself to move. Magic wasn't supposed to sound like that. In all the stories, magic just poofed people away. It didn't do whatever that was. She wanted to stay in her room forever, just crying and shaking. But as noon crept closer, her stomach began to growl, and Mary had to get up and use the toilet before her bladder burst. As she stood in the doorway to the bathroom, Mary felt her eyes straying to the head of the stairs. It was so quiet down there, much quieter than it had been earlier, and Mary wanted to know what lay downstairs. She edged closer, feet feeling heavy before peeking down. The sneaker-clad foot was just visible under the bottom of the stairs. Mary wanted to go back to her room and crawl back under her blankets, but she knew that she had to see what had happened. Mary knew that they hadn't disappeared like in a fairy story, and now she had to face whatever it was that happened to them. The sneaker-clad foot belonged to one of her brothers, and after seeing him, she prayed to God that she'd just go back upstairs. Her brother was laying face down in a pool of blood and his own sick. He was reaching for something under the table, and as she looked, Mary realized he was reaching for his mother's hand. Her hand stood out on the floor like a pale starfish, but unlike her brother, her back was against the floor, and her face was a terrible mask. Her mouth hung open, blood trickling from the corners, and her eyes were rimmed with red tears as they stared into oblivion. She'd fallen. She'd taken most of the dishes on her side of the table with her, and her arms were covered in oozy cuts as she clutched the tablecloth in one stiff hand. Her other brother lay across the table, his blood staining the floor, dull and rusty red. Her dad had died on his way to the kitchen, and his handprint against the linoleum were grisly. They were gone. They had gone away, just as Mary had wanted. As she curled herself into a ball and sobbed into her knees, the perpetrator of their going appeared beside her. "Now why are you crying?" he asked, almost haughtily. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" Mary looked up at him, and he must have seen something on her face because he scampered back a few steps just out of arm's reach. "I just wanted them to go away. I didn't want you to kill them." "Kill them? Kill them? Like they killed my children for generations. You think this is the first appearance of the trap, do you? Your grandfather taught your father well. He carried many of us in that trap. Then he would toss us, trap and all, into the river to drown. I've seen countless of my kind go into the river and never come back alive. They went away. And now, so have your parents." He got close again, seeing as she was in no mood to snatch him and deliver the final blow. "And I didn't kill them, my girl. You did." He had misjudged her, though. Mary was indeed in a snatching mood. And that's where they found her, when the police broke down the door. Lying amidst the bodies of her family her Christmas gift giver still clutched in her hand. Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and thank you so much for watching tonight's video, or by listening to tonight's episode of the podcast, or by finding this in some other way that's not a podcast or a video, which I probably didn't upload, but hey, thank you for listening. And as always, I want to give a big thank you to everybody who's supporting me on Patreon. That includes everybody who's been waiting for me to update my Patreon, and I thank you all so much for being so patient with me. But especially, I want to give a thank you to Jordan Alexander Sanchez, Jakob Fenske, Stephanie Butler, Bobby Karman, Chance Burnett, Kraus, Tristain Pelton, AcidSystem, Adam Gerecke, Aeryn Stormcrow, Aika Limchoc, Amber Clark, Angelus, Atomaurus, Bastion Beefcake, Blue the Enigma, Brayden Morris, Broken Beast 320, Captain Scurvy, Caspian, Shelly J, Corey Kenshin, Cronut 509, Crusader Chocobo, Cryptic Nightmares, Curse Pox Primarch, Dakota Lane Whetstone, Daniel Polson, Darth Miver, Deleted Account, Dirt Diver 030, M, Esteban, Fester's Lampshade, Freddy Krueger, Gorag Trimagazine, Grand Moth the Milky, Hades' Nephew, Happy Birthday Jason Wilson, Harley, Himbo Jerry, Horseman Sec Time, Insanity Gamer X, Jay Cairns, Jesus Corneo, Jordan Humble, Justin LaFontaine, Kaylee Ambrose, Kiri the Sloth, Crazy Kid, Cryolinian, Lambda M98, Lisa Cottrell, Little Crow, Lord Life's Best, Lupita Galvin, Love You Eminem, Matt Bach, Melted Lake, Michael Allen Jr. Bashirs, Mike, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Nate Cull, Nico Kayo, Psychomel, Red Shadowcat, Rob Like Sharp Things, Samahai, Sashi Suzaku, Seclude, Stricken, Tali Sue, Tater Chip, That Creepy Chick, The Ginger Bros, Turtle Man, Voice of Sand, William King, Xavier and Cheyenne, Yargul, and Zachary Graphius. If you would like to join this list of names that I horribly mispronounce, then please head over to patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta, or you can always check out the names in the description down below, or you can honestly support for even just $1, because it really helps me out when you guys do, and I appreciate it infinitely. So thank you all on Patreon, thank you all so much. Thank you for watching on YouTube and subscribing and liking videos and leaving comments about videos that you like, or leaving comments about why I haven't finished the 4th audiobook yet, or leaving comments about new stories that you've seen and you'd like to see on this channel. And to everyone, sweet dreams.